So I thought to pick up on some of the themes that Venerable Chuni and Venerable Jigme have been talking about in the last couple of days. So, the day before, Venerable Chuni talked about how we can approach monasticism as a way of life. It's not like you have a particular destination that you arrive at after being ordained a certain amount of time, but it's just how you live. And it encompasses your whole worldview and so forth. And then yesterday, Venerable Jigme was saying the same thing about our Buddhist practice. Again, it's not like even in this life we're going to understand one text. Yeah, it's going to take many, many lifetimes, and it's just this ongoing process of how we work with it, integrate it into our experience. And so I wanted to explore this idea, though, that doing something as a way of life is not specific to a particular vocation or a profession or even an activity, but it's actually an approach to try and do something as a way of life, as opposed to it's a task on my list, or it's gonna be I need to reach this level now that I'm at this level, right? And it's like there's a clear framework, versus approaching something as a way of life. So I was exploring this idea with the folks at my lunch table, and I thought Wesley came up with a great example, which is the activity of drinking tea. So I'm sure all of us have our own little rituals around drinking tea that reflect our habits. For me, in relation to tea and food, I just like to be efficient. So, I'm happy to get whatever tea bag is there. I don't care about the brand. I put it in the cup, right? I add hot water. Some people care about how hot the water is. I really don't. I put my soy milk or oat milk, 2 teaspoons of sugar. That's it. Let it sit, go, right? And I'm sure all of you have your own equivalent, right, of using the ball or the loose leaf or whatever it is. Okay, so that's one way of making tea. And then Wesley was pointing out that there is a whole, the way of tea, cha dao, right? Tea as a way of life, right? There are all these implements, there's a whole ceremony. It's meant to help you to slow down and relate to everything you do in a more mindful way. And he was saying how in the Japanese Zen tradition, I think, everything represents some aspect of the Dharma. So the water in the pot is the noumenon, and the actual implements are the phenomena, and then you get the noumenon and the phenomena. Okay, it's just tea, right? But, just having this whole different approach to just this simple activity changes how you relate to it, and then it in turn changes you. Right, and how you see the world. And it's not just, get a cup of tea and drink it and get on with life anymore. So this has been very alive for me, partly also because of this conversation that we had, Venerable Lamsa and I had with Venerable Children while we were planning for Geshe-la's visit here, Geshe Delek Wangmo's visit here. And at the time, we were talking through what activities we were going to plan. And then Venerable made a very simple statement of fact, which was, some of you here have been learning Tibetan for some years now, and it would be good if we had someone here who can translate from Tibetan into English, now that we've had Geshe-la come this year and also Yangting Rinpoche. Simple statement of fact. Unfortunately, she's talking to people from High Achievers Neurotic Society. Venerable is shaking her head. So I don't hear statement of fact. I hear, you have failed. That's what I hear. You have been learning Tibetan for so long, and you just haven't reached this particular level, and what have you been doing with your time? I'm like, oh, okay. So that's what I heard. I came out of the meeting with oh my God, we have to compensate. I have to go to Nepal and learn how to translate for a year. Okay, we've got to make up for all the lost time. High Achiever Neurotics solution is to write your teacher a one maybe 10-page letter proposing the things you're going to do to fix everything that went wrong. And I think she replied I think you need to get your priorities straight. I'm like, okay, that's true. So anyways, I went into a big discouragement thing around this activity. And so I just left it as it was. And also in preparation for Geshe Delek Wangmo's visit here, I was looking up resources for teaching English. Yeah, and then I happened across a website by a language coach. And I was surprised to learn that there are a lot of people who coach people in learning languages. They are themselves, polyglots or whatnot, but they just enjoy doing it. And all of them were saying, you can't learn a language just to reach a certain level. It's a way of life. I'm like, oh, as in, once you have a level or whatever, maybe for work and whatnot, it kind of takes a lot of the joy out of it. And it was just pointing out how all of us have different motivations for interacting with a language or wanting to pick one up. And it's so important to allow it to change your life. And that language learning is a life-changing process because you enter into a new culture, you get to know a whole different society, you meet different people, and it never ends. And somehow just having that shift in mindset, as opposed to like, oh, there's a fixed level that you were supposed to reach, and again, you were too slow and you will never get there. Totally misery-making. It's like, oh, it's a way of life. Yeah, how do I integrate bits and pieces into my practice? What's my motivation for doing this? How do I keep this alive and joyful? So that just completely shifted the way I could come back to learning Tibetan language, just, in ways that support my Dharma practice, or to take it as a practice as well, instead of imputing all this like need to reach a certain level and whatnot. And so that's why I've been thinking about this idea of, when we approach things as a way of life, how does that change how we relate to it, and how does it allow it to change us? Yeah. So this is like the positive aspect of it. I think also it got me thinking about like to be a lot more mindful about professions and activities we engage in. Because it's never the case that you do a job or you have a hobby and it kind of lives it in its own compartment. It affects the rest of your life, right? It affects how you think. So if people work as, say, a bartender, right, that changes their whole way of life, right? What time you get up, when you have time to spend with your family, how you organize your life, what you feel you need to learn about in your spare time is going to be affected by that. I found one website about bartending as a way of life, and people who would choose to do that, but without being cognizant that, it has a really deep, long-ranging impact, especially from a karmic perspective. That just got me thinking about we've got to be very careful about all these different, whether it's our profession, and that's why right livelihood is so important, or even seemingly innocuous activities. I'm sure there are people for whom bonsai trimming is a way of life, or bowling is a way of life, and we've got to think about whether that's necessarily a good use of our time, and how is it informing the way we live and our values. So those are just some thoughts I have about this whole approaching things as a way of life, and being mindful of how the things we do affect us. And ultimately, of course, what we want to learn and embody is the Bodhisattva's way of life, right? That's independent of any profession, hobby, whatnot that we engage in, but it's a whole different mindset that we're trying to bring to every single thing that we do until we achieve full awakening.